Thank you so much for joining us this evening. You all could be really anywhere doing anything right now, but you're here because you're wanting to learn and you are interested in hearing perspectives from some of the most compelling thinkers, in our opinion, who are making connections between ecology, the arts, activism, and agriculture, and so many other areas too.
We want to begin by thanking Non-Human Teachers for hosting us tonight in this beautiful space. Non-Human Teachers is a nonprofit organization that takes a new approach to ecological storytelling, igniting a sense of wonder about our rapidly changing Earth to make us better citizens and help us to imagine it differently. And just want to make a quick announcement that the restroom is in the back. Yes, non-human teachers. Their mission is very much in line with what we do at Chiagi, as well as our co-presenters GYOPO and Second Generation Seeds. We wanted to quickly tell you about each organization so that you can better understand how meaningful these collaborations are.
So Chiagi Seed Story is a collective which includes the four of us, Grace, Ginny, Ellie, myself, Hannah, and a fifth collaborator, Hyun, who is up in the Bay Area right now. So we partner with community-based organizations and we invite seniors to share their stories, food memories, and evoke memorable meals, which are then transcribed, interpreted, and shared as zines and orally at public gatherings. Zines, where meals inspired by the stories are shared. Chiagi is a way for us to forge meaningful intergenerational connections and uncover rich narratives that may otherwise be lost to time.
Chiagi also grows and shares Korean heritage crops with the elders, and shout out to Cultiva LA, who shared a plot with us at their MacArthur Park Community Garden. This program is the first part in a series about the gochu, or chili pepper. We've been collecting oral histories on the pepper from our elder community in Koreatown and from people like you. The second program on the pepper will include a community meal and the launch of a pepper zine, so please stay tuned. And Second Generation Seeds, which you will hear more about during Kristen Leach's presentation, is a wonderful growers collective that tends to the kinship between the Asian, Southwest Asian, and North African diaspora by preserving, adapting, and breeding these culturally beloved crops that have evolved and journeyed along with us.
So GYOPO, the third presenting organization, has been so privileged to collaborate with Chiagi and Second Generation Seeds over these past few years. We've been growing alongside each other, sharing volunteers, audiences, and core members and core organizers. GYOPO's mission, in case this is your first program, is to galvanize diasporic Korean cultural producers to generate progressive, critical, intersectional, and intergenerational discourses and community alliances through things like public programs, screenings, readings, art commissions, exhibitions, and all kinds of things. We organize our events with a robust, beautiful volunteer community of around 50 people and a small but nimble and powerful staff of 2. So we're starting to do this now, but we're sharing a little bit about how we're structured and what our needs are to ensure that our programming remains accessible and free to everyone. So if you are compelled, please make a small donation. Every dollar goes a really long way to keep our lights on and our motors running. So you'll find QR codes scattered around everywhere. But also, please support Chiagi, buy a zine. We have some T-shirts over there too. But whatever you're able to give, your time. We have a volunteer QR code up here, and you can talk to me or Joanne, our new operations manager, and we can bring you into the fold. So if you want to volunteer, reach out to us. And I'd also love to mention that our next program is on August 24th, in a couple weekends, and then our big annual fundraiser on Chuseok is on September 15th. So get on our mailing list if you don't want to miss out on those things coming up.
So tonight we have the pleasure of listening to a few poems by Mary Lau Valle, a food journalist and recipe developer who co-authored with her husband Victor M. Valle, who will be presenting afterwards the now classic Recipe of Memory, 5 Generations of Mexican Food, a memoir based on the stories of female ancestors who had curated more than a century of recipes. The book has garnered literary nominations from the Julia Child Cookbook Award and the James Beard Foundation Award, among other accolades. In addition to receiving awards for poetry and a master's degree in nonfiction for her memoir, Three Rivers, One Ocean, Mary has traveled to Mexico and China to document the saga of her Chinese-Mexican family.
And after Mary's poetry reading, Victor will share a 15-minute presentation. Victor M. Valle is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer whose most recent book, The Poetic Sapphire, Metaphors of Eating or Chile Eating in the Borderlands, which she will be speaking on today, proposes an eco-aesthetic of the culinary art. He is the author of many other books, including Recipe of Memory, City of Industry, Genealogies of Southern California Power, and Latinx Writing, Los Angeles, Nonfiction Dispatches from a Decolonial Rebellion, in which he delves deeper into the contested genealogies of LA's urban places. Oh yeah, and we have a few copies of The Poetic Sapphire, if anyone is interested in further your reading.
And so then after Victor's presentation, we'll have Kristen Leach present. And Kristen, I'm debatably one of Kristen's biggest fans, and I'm trembling here because Kristen's here. Kristen has been growing Korean crops in various regions of California over the past 15 years, and recently moved with her family to Sebastopol to start Gohyang Farms, a really incredible seed research farm project and community space. The site will expand on the work of second-generation seeds that Kristen's been doing for some years. A network of Asian and Swana growers preserving and adapting plants and cultures. And so then after Kristen's presentation, and we're doing the intros now so we can just flow, Sehi Cho, over here, Sehi will share a 6-minute teaser for her upcoming film, The Yearning Table. Sehi is moderating our conversation between Kristen and Victor after that 6-minute video. Hopefully she'll share as much as she can, too, about the work that she does during that time. Sehi is a writer, a cook, a filmmaker, and holds an MFA in creative writing from CalArts. And since 2019, she's been working between Los Angeles and Mexico, researching the Korean-Mexican diasporic community there and cuisine.
We're going to have a Q&A afterwards, and following the brief Q&A, please stick around for some refreshments. Sehi has some tastings in the greenhouse. We have Victor's Mexican hot chocolate in the back. Some spicy snacks abound. We're also going to be collecting some pepper memories. We have this beautiful questionnaire. If you'd like to share some of your memories or stories on peppers, please do. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for bearing with all the introductions. Without further ado, Mary.
Hello, everybody. These poems turned out to be my outlines for my master's degree. After I won first place in poetry at PCC, the professor said, "You're ready." And so the history of my family is that my grandfather, Lau Men Choi, aka Luis Lau, came to work on the Southern Pacific. Ended up in Tecuala, Nayarit, and Mexico, and then he brought like 10 family members, and my grandmother Antonia, her sister Guadalupe, and her younger sister, mi tía Orea, or Sara, they all married cheap Wong, and Lao. And so I start with my grandmother, Antonia. Antonia, as a young girl, you stand at your mother's side in the Tecuala marketplace, then stroll with your sister Sara, hand in hand around the kiosk your husband built, walking until you awake in the dream on the South China Sea, on the Manchuria steamer headed for Chunsan. It is 1927. You look up from the rickshaw to a majestic house of cobalt roof tiles, poems written on the risers of each stair step. They lead to your bedroom, to the balcony that overlooks the Pearl River, to the reflection of your husband's portrait, watching from a mirror, absentee landlord who counted his returns in half decades. You dress for him in a silk chunsam, wear jade rings, speak sign language to your in-laws who call you White Witch behind your back. In your patio, white sheets sail after each birth, flags waving for your mestizo children in the saffron sun. Next morning, after mist evaporates, you sit on your balcony drinking rice wine, roll cigarettes, sing Mexican ballads so everyone can hear you, exhale the gray smoke that floats up like the hooded crane that circles above your house, smoke that caresses the trailing edges of its long wispy wings. Epitaph. After many years, Lao Manchoy returns, is arrested by the communists. He awaits payment of a ransom once, twice, from his son in Mexico. It comes too late. Consuelo, his youngest daughter, at dawn steers a sampan downstream, fishes your body with a long bamboo pole. Lao Manchoy, you swim like the golden carp in the village pond, while Antonia stands in a circle of cranes. Mother Crane spears a small turtle in her nightly vigil to protect her king. Lotus seed carp swallows, turns into a crane, patriarch of the feathered tribe that flies away, to remembered for 1,000 years in his grandfather's ancestral hall. Today on his altar, he stares back at us from his copper spirit tablet. And then we went in 87. My dad said, "Are you ready?" And we said, yes. They opened it up and we were all registered. My grandfather, before he left in 1947, the last time, he took my oldest cousin, Leonorcita, she was 7, and he registered all our names in the registrar in China. So we were able to get a discount because we were like going back home. So anyway, we arrived. And this is just a little poem that I forgot who it was from, I just picked up. Farmers weeding at noon, sweat down the field soon. Who knows food on a tray, thanks to their toiling day. This is where I start. It's called Rice. Morning, first week of July, 1987. We hired a driver and van from our hotel in Guangzhou. It will carry my father, my Aunt Carmen, and me and my 8-year-old daughter Lucena back to Kekok, our ancestral village on the Pearl River. We filled the van with excitement, held back tears, wondering what we might find in my grandfather's house 51 years after my father had left it. My father sitting next to the driver, right arm hanging from an open window, shouting to Carmen in the back seat each time he recognized a landmark. The park where he played, his elementary school, the Sun Yat-sen Institute where he studied, the Lao Ancestral Hall, now turned into a museum. Its marble burial slabs that shone against the mountains, partly obscured by the frenzied building. Arriving in Chunsan, he pointed to the banyan trees clinging to the Pearl's banks, their dangling branches rooted in water, the march of 100 armed monsters glimpsed from the back seat. Where's the village? I asked impatiently, as my dad pointed his finger forward, signaling to the driver, veer off here, down a dusty, narrow road to a dozen women in black silk. They emerge from dust clouds, fine particles painting them a pale gold, scarves wrapped about their heads, shielding their eyes from the sun. They move in unison as they flailed the grain, then raked it, flailed and raked, back and forth, separating husks from grains. They heaped into big mounds in the middle of the road, my first smell of freshly threshed rice. When our driver nipped a raker's heels, the woman stopped, graciously moved back, inviting him to drive over their mounds. The van's tires made soft, crumbling noises, dislodging grains from heavy rice heads. It's the spring crop, my dad said, remembering how the entire village worked his father's rice paddies, now thick with celadon rice heads and tender blades of summer plantings. The village moved quickly to dry and store the greenish gold in fat gunny sacks they would later divide to feed their families through winter. As a girl, Dad taught me, rinse the rice once, twice in a weathered pot, scrubbing the grains that turned the water cloudy, then sparkling clear between my small fingers. We soaked the rice, Dad said, to release its chi, gives the eater a more peaceful soul. He filled the pot to the first knuckle of the middle finger and then boiled it until small pockets appeared on the surface, placed the lid to steam it slowly. 7 rice bowls waited for me. As eldest daughter, I waited for my father to place a small mound of rice in a bowl he gently flipped, in a quick circular motion, into a steaming ball. I served my eldest brother first, always from the right side, always with 2 hands. We dressed our round dinner table in a thick felt maroon-colored baize the priest brought from Mexico to set off the white chrysanthemums and delectable dishes my dad arranged on our table. A flotilla plates carrying something that flies, something that swims, that walks on 4 legs, and noodles with Chinese wood ears glistening in oyster sauce and sherry, tender mustard stalks swimming in homemade chicken broth we slurped instead of water. My father hung the kitchen god, Zhao Zhang, high up on the dining room wall to ensure our good behavior. Hold the rice bowl close to your mouth. Scoop the rice with your chopsticks, Dad would say, and never eat all the rice. Always leave 1 grain to show the cook that you weren't starving. And hold your chopsticks close to the bottom, near their tapered tips, to make you stay close to home. Father learned this as a child living in a village where his kin grew rice and remembered the sojourners in Mexico, Los Angeles, and Hawaii, until we returned with stories to tell their grandchildren, the ones who waited for us. Every rice grain left in the bowl, Grandma Antonia said, giggling, meant your future husband would have a pock-marked face. Oh no, we shriek in horror. And when we visited my aunt, she always greeted us with, have you eaten rice yet? A question my father instructed us to answer with a yes. Never say you haven't eaten. There are 7 of us, a burden on the people who would feed us. He then promised, we'll get food afterwards at Temple and Broadway, past Chinese grocery stores displaying freshly picked tangerines piled on crates, shiny skins that made our mouth water. We scoured store windows for sticky rice and pork balls wrapped in lotus leaves, went down the alley to where they steamed sweet fermented rice cakes sold in thick wedges for $0.25. Visit the old Chinese merchant, Jose, who spoke Spanish with a gold tooth and gave us each a salty dried plum to suck after we said our Chinese names. Dad taught me how to fry the leftover rice. Let it stick to the bottom of the pot until it turned golden brown and crispy, and offered it to us as an afternoon treat when we milled about the kitchen. Weekends, Dad boiled the rice for hours in chicken broth and ginger until it turned into congee. He served it in deep bowls, garnished them with peanuts, cilantro, 100-year-old eggs, dried shrimps, a dash of sesame oil and soy sauce. Slurping, clapping loudly, we watch wrestling on TV. Mr. Moto versus Freddie Blassie. I rooted for Mr. Moto, a nearsighted child I sat glued to the television as my siblings sat behind me on the sofa. Mr. Moto threw rice on the wrestling mat before every match. He was known to have a soft stomach because he ate too much rice, the TV announcer said, always taking a knee drop to his midsection before he landed a Mongolian chop to Blassie's thick neck and satisfying my hunger to strike that blow. For Antonia's 79th birthday banquet, my dad warned, never eat rice until the meal ends. Eyes wide open, we sat through 8 courses, pushing away our bowls of rice to resist temptation. Years later, I visited Antonia in the converted garage she rented from her Chinese daughter-in-law. Have you eaten rice yet? She asked. No, abuelita, I answered. She offered to make me lunch. It's the year of the ram, she said. We must celebrate. She then instructed, pull the silk quilt from her bed, get down on your knees, reach under its metal frame, push aside musty shoes, purses, drag out the 25-pound bag of rice imported from China. But my reaching fingers felt a body lying next to it, a slumbering 25-pound bag of frijoles she brought in Chinatown. The bed was her altar, the quilt our colonized present, underneath the worlds of my ancestors.
Hi y'all, thanks for coming. I want to thank Ginny, Ellie, and Sehi for all their help and all their communication, all their recommendations and instructions. I'm talking about basically the middle of the book. So the beginning of the book deals more with poetics, and the end of the book deals with it. This deals with kind of a blank spot in the history of the borderlands, which includes California all the way to Louisiana, right? Northern Mexico and the U.S. Southwest. And so what happens is, the reason I had to experiment to talk about this time, because in the archival records, we have tons of information, enough for a significant amount of information and text and sources to talk about pre-Hispanic Mexico, early colonial Mexico, and then in the late 19th century and the 20th century, there's more. But there's a 200-year period there where basically the Spanish strictly control what native people will write, say, and do. So if you want to write a story of how the Chile gets to the borderlands, you have to use other techniques, because the regular conventional humanities sources won't do it for you. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of the political economy, or the cultural political economy of Chile, why it gets here. And I'm going to simplify a lot, so I'm going to just skip because I know other people have to talk. First thing I wanted to say is one of the things I'm dealing with here and thinking of is about how we become indigenized to place, right? And we have this great quote from Standing Bear in 1933, and he says, "The white man does not understand America. He is too far removed from its formative processes. The roots of the tree of his life have not yet grasped the rock and soil. The man from Europe is still a foreigner and an alien." And that's sort of the challenge that I'm dealing with here, is that, well, then how do we not become like this unrooted person, right? Especially in a time of climate change and crisis. How do we become attached to place, right? And that's the challenge. And how do we make this possible for everybody, not just for a certain number of people? And then there's another thing here, and this is another organizing idea. While studying this thing, I'm going to go back just for a second. You look here, and this is one of the things I began to find when I began to look at native sources, when they're talking about Chile. One of the things that becomes clear is that they are seeing the world differently. And here you see a child bringing a pot to its mouth. This is from a map from 1540, the Segundo Mapa de Cuauhtinchan, which is This was the rulers of a little kingdom called Cuauhtincha, which means the eagle's nest. This is in southern Puebla. They're being encroached upon. They're now our brothers to the north of Cholultecas, the people from Cholula, much bigger kingdom. And people are going through genocide or collapse of people, and people don't know why. The population is crashing because of European diseases. People don't quite understand why. And it's a crisis. And the people of this area want to say, well, they want to tell themselves, this is our genealogy. They're basically a dynastic genealogy. And they're going to take these records into the courts, because at this point the Spanish colonial authorities will say, we will accept native documents to prove their rights to a place, right? So in that map, which is, you can find in the Museum of Anthropology and History in Mexico City, owned by a private family, that's a whole other story. In that map, 2,500 images. Basically, they're using a map to tell a story about a people. And in that map is this image of a little baby drawing a pepper to its mouth. Now, part of what the child is actually doing is not clear, because this map was traced over so many times. None of the other images in the map were traced except this one. It was important for some reason, and they were literally putting a sheet of paper and tracing over it to create this over and over again. So it was partly damaged. But what you see here, and when I began to realize, and when I began to look at other metaphors from the poetry and other sources, saying, no, the child and the plant exist in a maternal relationship with the plant. So a plant can be a mother to a human, right? And I go, yes, yes, yes. And so all of a sudden, the human, the non-human, those categories that we think are so important are not important here. This is a different mapping, a different ontology of the world. Okay. And then when I realized, if I'm going to do this, then I also have to respect that poetics. And all of a sudden, when I made that shift, all these other things begin to become visible that I, as a Westerner, not trained in these native languages or in these subjects, I began, wow, this is a whole thing. And so that's what the cover is about. So I'm going to skip. And then one of the things that becomes clear is that after talking to the famous Zapoteca chef, Abigail Mendoza Ruiz, she talked about the kitchen as a loom, and the chilies representing each string in the loom. And I go, whoa, this is an interesting idea. And I began to realize that this metaphor of knowledge was common. And so here we have a triqui, or this is a native people from Oaxaca. And she says, thanks to our grandmothers, we now know that our loom is a blank canvas in which to capture all knowledge. Knowledge of our grandmothers and also ourselves. So this idea, this very ordinary metaphor of the loom, so wow, that became visible, and ended up finding many examples of this. These are not esoteric ideas within those cultures, okay? So, and why is this important? Well, one of the issues here I just wanted to not forget, confronting the metaphors and narratives of settler colonialism, because these were a tragedy and a trauma in the past, but they're still today. If we look at Brazil, how they failed but tried to disqualify native land ownership, saying that these people were nomads. This false distinction between settler, farmer, city builders versus hunter-gatherer nomads. This distinction has been used over and over again to disqualify any claims to place, right? And that's why we're in a time again where the critique of colonialism is on the table, and it's happening. So, okay, so I'll skip that. Now, just get back to part one, the chili, its own travels. Well, what we find here is that, and this, by the way, is constantly being updated, so in a few years, they'll have even more precise ways of talking about this. But one of the things we're talking about here is that we're talking about 5 domesticated species. There are about 25 to 26 wild varieties. People count them differently. And what you're finding is that somewhere in the Andes, we get a cluster of plants, and birds begin to spread them. And they're like clouds of genetic material, you might say. One cloud is the annum frutens and chinens, right? Then we get to pubens exmium, cardanacea, I don't know how to pronounce it, and we have bacatum and so forth and all. And so what's happening, as the birds begin to spread them throughout South America, you notice that it's traveling, humans later begin to interact with them, and they then begin to sort of select. So there's a series of changes that occur. Now, what's interesting is, now you notice the Annams, which is the most commercially dispersed species of chili, right, is the Annam. That's the one that travels the world the most. Although there are 4 other domesticated species, okay? It's going all the way up into the borderlands, to the southwest. You notice that? It's interesting, right? And so we're going to talk more about that, because that ends up being the sort of the bread and butter of Mesoamerican chili growing, okay? Now, just to put this in perspective, these are the domesticated types. And basically, the top 2 are Mesoamerican domestication, the other 3 are South American, right? And within each of these categories, there are many more. If you just look at the Annams, we're talking about more than 50 known standard varieties in Mexico, okay? So now the other thing that's interesting is that, to put this in perspective, in terms of world food, the plants of the Western Hemisphere, domesticated and developed by native people, now account for 60% of the crops grown in the world. So chili is just one: potatoes, sweet potatoes, peanuts, papayas, pineapples, chocolate. It goes on and on and on. A long list. Quinoa. So this is sort of this other deep history, which is now changing the anthropology of food, because they're beginning to say, well, maybe native occupation, people from Beringia who walked over, came here sooner than we thought, and there's now strong evidence that at least 23,000 years ago, we have people already in what is now New Mexico. The people, it's close to the place where they found the Folsom Point, what used to be the marker of arrival of native people. Well, they basically pushed that time back 10,000 years. So just to put it in perspective, okay? Now this is the one where most of the chili we eat comes from this. And we're talking, I always forget the name of what I say. It's Capsicum annum lobiscarium, I think that's how you say it. It's something kind of close. But here, birds scatter this throughout Central America, also through the Caribbean. But they're thinking now that the people in Mesoamerica get it through the Central America. Mesoamericans begin to harvest these wild chilies about 7,000 years ago. So they're picking them, they're eating them, and that's a whole other series of mysteries. This is a very hot chili. It's delicious, very hot, but also fast fading, right? So you get hot and you go, you get to relax. Okay? But why people did this is still, there's a lot of speculation about this. So it's how we're going to know definitively what it is. We know it's kind of something like other kinds of psychoactive ingredients or sensations. It's not dangerous. It's not like taking psilocybin or other things, but it does alter your state. Okay, so there's thrill-seeking and need for variety that people are seeking. So these are some of the reasons why they talk about this. There's also the pain. In my book, I talk about the neurochemistry of this, which I'm not going to talk about today. But there's a certain pleasure in that derived from a little micro increases in the serotonin reuptake cycle. You get certain pleasure out of that. So okay. So now I have a little map there in the bottom where it says La Cañada. Well, on the border between the blue Papalhuapan and La Cañada is a mountain range, and that's where they think now the first chilies were domesticated. We're talking now 5,200 years ago. They begin the process. It isn't completed. Women are primarily doing this, and they're basically finding in the middens and in their trash heaps plants are growing. They said, well, why do I have to go pick them? I'll just grow them here. So a whole but that takes another several thousand years before standard varieties begin to emerge. So it's a whole process. Now, here's the Sierra Madre. I'm going to just skip here. Yeah, and so what they're saying now is that the people of the Oaxaca, the Mixtec, Zapotec. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, guy, why didn't somebody tell me?
You can hold it. You can pull it out.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, I hear that's Adrian. I can hear you, but I can't see you. Okay. So basically, about 1,700 years ago, people have 7 varieties just in one cave, and so that's very interesting. Why do people need 7 types of chili? You know, it's like so already what you're seeing is a kind of aesthetic that you could begin to see. Now, here's a little more. Here's other metaphors of human, non-human kinship. What one Tarahumara or Raramuri scholar calls kincentric chili, right? There's a whole idea of kinship. I showed you the map, but here's another one. The Mexica, or what people call the Aztecs, they had a goddess. Her name was Tlauqui Cihuatl Inchilcintli, the venerable lady of the little red chili. And she is the sister of Chicomecoatl, which is Our Lady of Sustenance. That goddess is responsible for all food, for all plant life, all animal life, all life, right? But what's interesting is that these people, these Mexicas, thought it was important that there be a separate god for Chile, because she just could have been part of Chicomecoatl's reign, right? Instead, no, she has her own domain, and she's the goddess of Chile. Now, both of these sisters are also, their brother is Tlaloc, the Earth Lord. So you're dealing with deep Mesoamerican religion, and right there, the Chile is right at the level of, and this is also really part of farming culture, because it's not the war gods or other gods. This is about earth, you know, that's very earth-centered. Now, we have Tlacpanec. These are people now in the state of Guerrero. They're talking about this chili here is the boss or the grandfather. And again, another kinship term, the Tonoho Odam, elder brother at the beginning of time. For the Cori is the name for the Raramuri. These are people now in northwestern Chihuahua. They say he is a Raramuri, a human Raramuri, who the maker of the world turned into a chili. Another way of showing connection to, breaking down this barrier between plant and humans, right? And then Darama, this is Cora, with Mary's ancestors from Nayarit. Cora, Lord of Chili, Salt, and Mezcal, right? All these very powerful agents, okay? And who served fellow gods chili flavored with salt harvested from his perspired testicles, right? So here's there are other, I didn't go through all of them. There's a strong connection with sensuality, right? Not surprising, okay? Now I'm gonna go forward here. And this idea of plants and human gods, this one is well known. This is my Abuel, child of a virgin sky goddess. Well, she's basically the child of all the agaves of Pulque, right? And she was the mother of 100 breasts. And when women died in childbirth, their children and the mothers went to suckle at the breast of the agave, right? So there's another kind of way of talking about these human, non-human kinship, concentric views, okay? Now, how far along am I going? Is that even going to give me a signal? Okay. All right, I'm just going to get to part 1 of my presentation. And here I'm just going to say a little bit about this map. One of the challenges is that a wild chili could only go this far because domesticated chilies could not cross, basically be beyond the Tropic of Cancer, because the nights are too cold. Chili can't take, the domesticated varieties can't take prolonged periods of temperature below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's hard to propagate them. You can get them to grow, but they don't prosper well. So that's one of the issues here. But what's interesting is that chili was found. I'm gonna go really fast here. This is how human migration is affected by mountains. Mountains are crucial. This is the corridor where people could travel up and down. And so when trade occurs with what's called the American South, was now the American Southwest, there was a lot of contact between people. People were taking dried chili north. They were also trading in wild chili. So even though they couldn't grow it, there was still sort of an economy, okay? And here this city right here is called Paquimé. This was a Puebloan city, apartment buildings. This is part of the complexes. But what was interesting, and they don't know exactly how or why this worked out, but there was a Toltec presence. They played the sacred ball game. They had the cult of Quetzalcoatl. Chocolate probably went through here to Chaco Canyon. So there was this communication between these worlds. They weren't hermetically sealed. Some have described it as a continuum where Mesoamerica is in communication with what we call the borderlands or the Northwest. All right. Here's this. I'll end with this here. Here's the other circulation of Chile, basically from looking at colonial records and talking about how basically the Spanish and the Portuguese are the ones who are mainly responsible for doing this. Now, when they started to do this, they thought they were going to make money. That was their intention. It didn't work out because at this time, interest in pepper, black pepper, is declining. That market is not there. So what happens is Chile is kind of taken, especially in Europe, is taken over by gardeners, hobbyists, small farmers, and then much later it becomes what we know now as those crops, okay? So I'm just going to skip all the way to the end, okay? Okay, so just to make it simple. And so this, what the book is about, and you'll get to read in the book, we're talking about inventing indigenizing practice, right? How do we become connected to place? Right? And plants are a perfect way of teaching you that, right? They tell you what they need, what will work, what doesn't work. That whole relationship with the material world, the living materiality, to say it another way, okay? And so when I'm talking about this, when you read the book, I'm not talking about playing Indian. I'm not talking about, because there's a tendency for people to sort of appropriate native, what they think would be native identities. No, I'm not talking about that. But I am saying learning from native practices and native wisdom. That is true. It's about supporting decolonial struggle at home and abroad, because this is not over. Native peoples all over the world, First Peoples, are still struggling with this. Defending what remains of the commons, because that's one of the things I see here. It's very important. That we're sharing seeds. We're exerting our own sovereignty over life, right? Because there are other powers in this world, the Monsantos and the other companies, that would like to own all of that, right? And recommunalizing the neoliberal enclosure. The property, land was sort of the measure, one of the measures of property, but it's not the only one. And at this time we go into the 21st century, new kinds of enclosures, new theories of property are emerging. And the biological is like the one I'm interested in, but land, air, water, knowledge, plant genomes, these are all things that we have to recommunalize. We have to take back, okay? Seed saving and seed sharing there are a lot of things we can do. There are big things, and there are a lot of small things that you just do with daily living. So it's all of them count, right? And one of them is seed sharing, and then cooking and gardening is daily adaptive place-making practices in which we become connected to the place. Because we're going to have to do it. We don't have a lot of choice. When I was looking at the latest maps of climate change and how it's going to affect crops, Mexico is going to have a harder and harder time growing corn. It's just going to get too hot. The United States, because it has so much land area, it can grow maize further north, but other countries are going to be shut out. It's quite serious. I don't want to get, this is a festive mood. So we have a lot of work to do. That's what I'm saying. So with that, please take a look at my book, and thank you for inviting me. Okay.
Okay, thank you all for being here on a weekend evening to talk about chili peppers and nerd out. And special thank you to GYOPO and Chiagi for bringing me down here and giving my family a vacation for once. It's really intimidating to know that I'm going to be at an event with Victor and Mary and Sehi, and just how beautifully they would render the pepper. And so I was racking my brain, how I could impress you all after what was surely going to be a very inspiring series of presentations. And naturally I thought, genome picture. So that's that. That's the chili pepper genome. And we want to just kind of go through a couple of the things, because I think the richness that Victor spoke to, and just kind of looking at the wild pathways and migration, but then also the human interaction with chili pepper, wanted to just look at what that looks like, because I do think there's a love language built into this, I think, that we're just trying to make visible. And so the chili pepper has 12 chromosomes, but within those 12 chromosomes, there's 3.5 gigabase pairs. And a gigabase pair is basically just a set of genes, right? And those genes are what code for all the different complex things plants do, the ways that they interact with different places, and then the ways that humans get to engage through artificial selection, right? So you can think about that as 3.5 billion possible combinations. That's a lot, right? So you think of just all the different ways that people have claimed pepper as their own and the devotion that they speak to it. But there really is something to that, because that's 3.5 billion possible novel expressions in all different combinations. So you think there's infinite possibilities, actually. And just for comparison, just because it's like, well, that sounds like a lot, but what does it mean? The tomato, which is the other closest relative to chili pepper, has 12 chromosomes as well. But within those 12 chromosomes of the tomato, they have 950 million base pairs, right? So substantially less. And so just to keep trying to make it relevant, there's another organism that has 3.2 gigabase pairs. Just curious if anyone could guess what that is. Somewhere more than a tomato, a little less than a pepper. It is, yeah, it's humans. That's the human genome. And so as Victor spoke about, like maybe during kind of like the early imperialist days and spice trading and migration, maybe chili pepper didn't pan out as it wasn't suiting kind of Western European tastes. But certainly now there's a lot more interest, because you see that footprint is quite substantial actually, and chili pepper not only has these billions of possibilities, but actually is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so as a specialty crop, sort of like a non-commodity crop, a vegetable crop that doesn't have a dual application for industry or for animal feed, there's a lot of land devoted to it, right? Because we have this sort of insatiable sadomasochistic need for spice. And so for that big footprint globally, probably about 2/3 of the production commercially for chili pepper is actually in Asia, and that's primarily scattered across India and China. And so when something occupies that type of footprint, again, people within this capitalist system think there's money to be made and everybody wants a piece of that. And so we were looking at, this is from a short course offered at UC Davis for seed industry workers. And the exercise was to determine which market segment you would go into as a fictional seed company. The winner was the Southeast Asian pepper market because of what's called hybrid conversion. And so it was this formula that you could basically assess kind of level of competition as one of these bigger multinational companies. And so the fact that in Southeast Asia, growers are growing a lot of peppers for export, and you can see in their first year, 3% were hybrid varieties, right? So seeds that farmers were buying from year to year. 97% were locally adapted land races. So instead of seeing this number and thinking like, wow, that's amazing. People have these varieties that have just been developed and bred and passed on that obviously do well in these regions that farmers like. It's seen as an opportunity to dismantle that and replace it. So they gave us an 8-year timeline to figure out how to basically convert that number so that hybrids would dominate 60% of the market. And this isn't like, I think it sounds like probably for all of you here, sort of nefarious to just realize like this is these intentional moves, but it was interesting to be in this class and realize it wasn't like evil cackling and stroking hairless cats. It was really business as usual, I think, within this iteration of capitalism. And so you do see then that this has played out catastrophically. So following the Green Revolution, you have the vast majority of land is devoted to growing hybrid cultivars. And the other part of this is, I was a field technician for a seed company, and we trialed a lot of Korean peppers. We started noticing, oh, the peppers are written in Korean, but who's owning it at the bottom? So these peppers were released by Syngenta, who was the largest investor in Korean agriculture, like during the 70s. So you imagine the tumult, military dictatorships, lots of economic impoverishment. And so Syngenta steps in, as they do in lots of parts of the world, to invest in agricultural infrastructure, mostly through predatory debt and other types of structural adjustment policies. And this wasn't just in Korea, this was happening all across Asia, right? And why, I think, so to break down a little bit of the agricultural economies that people stand to benefit from, it's you're selling the seed, right? And that seed needs to be bought year to year. The other reality is that most of these seed companies are also nested within larger chemical manufacturers. And so the seed, to do well, also relies on a regimen of pesticides, herbicides, and different types of fertilizers, right? So it's sort of a package deal that acts as a Trojan horse, where you're not only getting farmers to buy the seed, but it's this whole array of products then, right, that becomes quite burdensome. The other thing that people have profited from is, as Victor said, another type of enclosure, which is monumental in seed, is intellectual property. So this was an example of a campaign to fight Syngenta. They were looking to patent a series of genes that were responsible for like a kind of wide range of fungal disease resistance. And that was all attributed to one pepper cultivated in Jamaica. So Syngenta didn't breed the pepper. They didn't cultivate that genetic sequence, right? That was naturally occurring in a pepper that had just been cultivated by farmers and peasants. But they had the technology to discover, quote unquote, that sequence and correlate it to the disease resistance so they could file for a patent, right? The other probably most substantial piece of intellectual property when it comes to talking about the chili pepper is a recessive mutation called cytoplasmic male sterility, CMS. Catchy as that is, I'll try to break it down so we understand what's going on. So basically, a plant that has the CMS mutation, chili peppers usually have a perfect flower, or what's botanically called a perfect flower, so it creates pollen, and it has the means to mature a seed, right? So a lot of annual crops, are perfect flowers in that regard. If they have this CMS gene, they basically don't create pollen, right? So you can see the comparisons of the flowers where you have the pistillate part, but the other staminate parts don't actually produce pollen, and so they just sort of self-abort. And the reason why this is so valuable is because to produce hybrid seed, typically you have someone removing the pollen-producing parts of that flower by hand. With tweezers, you go out and you mark your plants, you tape them shut basically, so that in the morning you remove the parts, you hand pollinate it, right? So it's extremely laborious. And so this technology was a real game changer because suddenly you had a flower doing what human hands were being paid pennies to do. And so the bad news too is like something going back to tomato that doesn't have this development. If you buy a hybrid tomato seed, it doesn't matter what company you buy it from. It doesn't matter if it's organically grown. You buy it from your small regional seed company, your local nursery. All of those hybrid tomato seeds are being grown in either Costa Rica, Thailand, or Vietnam, where somebody is emasculating the flowers and pollinating by hand, right? So I think that's the other part too, is just realizing like all the different parts of the labor and land and footprints that go into kind of propping up this industrial seed economy. So CMS, very important. This also was the main reason why Seminis in the 90s purchased the two primary vegetable seed breeding companies in Korea, was solely because of being able to identify like a native Jeju island variety of pepper that had a strong correlation with this gene, right? And so they bought the two biggest companies. They just acquired them solely for this piece of intellectual property. So this is kind of like how staggering the implications, I think, are really are. Glad to depress you all on your Saturday night. We're gonna try to dig ourselves out of this depressing hole. But it's also easy to beat up on those big guys, right? Yeah, down with Syngenta and down with Monsanto, they're evil. I think the other problem though is, I think for us at second generation, like we're trying to make the case that cultural diversity is really necessary for preserving biological diversity. So if you think about like all wild centers of origin for most domesticated species, there's like a complete link. It's arm in arm with linguistic richness and the preservation of indigenous languages. And I think that that just says so much, and I think that for a lot of, even within the US, that has now this, this love of heirlooms, and I think more opportunities as a consumer to make conscientious choices and find seeds that are being grown, organically by small local companies supporting small farmers. There's still a lot of things, mostly related to land access for BIPOC farmers, that means a lot of exclusion from that seed industry for those growers, right? Just because it doesn't pencil out entirely to do commercial seed production. So we ended up partnering with Seed Savers Exchange, which is a large membership-based organization and nonprofit that has a pretty substantial, kind of like the largest non-governmental seed bank within the US. And most of those seeds in government gene banks and then in NGOs are facing a sort of dire situation because there's just not the resources for public breeding anymore. There's not the resources for people to preserve each variety really well. And so the seed is just really, it's dying, kind of behind these closed doors. So Seed Savers Exchange recognized that and reached out to us to grow out varieties that originate in Asia and try to both kind of examine them, contribute data, and then bank back seeds. So the first crop we started with as a collective was pepper because everybody, again, it was like, oh, this is universal. All of us have a pepper we care about across our different cultures. And growing out the Korean peppers was interesting because what became really clear was that a lot of the seeds that Seed Savers Exchange had gotten were people that were tourists in Korea at one point, or picking up a seed packet they couldn't read, or things that they were getting from places like the USDA GRIN database. And because of that CMS gene, a lot of those varieties were actually super unstable hybrids. And so then being grown in backyards and on small farms, what ends up happening is those genes start unraveling into all the array, all that background of everything those parent lines did before they were really suppressed. So you see this example, this was one accession, and each plant produced like insanely different fruit. Looked really different, tasted really different. And that was kind of across the board, and we were like, okay, well, if we look at the pedigree of these seeds, yeah, they were coming through, they were donated by Korea between the 80s and 90s, right at this big transformation, where a lot of these breeding lines were just dumped into other governmental banks. So this is two examples from two different seed catalogs in the US. This is both called Korean hot pepper as like a proper variety name. The one on the right is listed as ornamental, and the one on the left is supposedly for authentic kimchi. And so I think confronted with that variability and just looking at that reality, I think for me was particularly concerning, I guess, just because when I started farming and growing Korean crops, it wasn't because I felt that I had any birthright to that or even knowledge to contribute. I just knew I had a lot of farming experience to contribute. I could grow these crops and make them accessible. But I think then just realizing that behind this sort of opaque industry, there are people curating that experience, and suddenly realizing like, well, who have I trusted to tell me what's Korean? Because I'm going off the seed packet. I went through Kitazawa's catalog when I started my farm, and if anything said it was Korean, I bought it, and I grew it. I'm like, this is great, there's a Korean cultivar of this. And then I think just through this whole process, realized it's a really misplaced trust that felt, yeah, I think kind of infuriating to like the emo adoptee parts of me, of just realizing like, oh, we've entrusted this to other people. And so the question for us through second generation was like, how do we actually bring those processes back into our web of relationships? And so we continue to try to parse out some of the things that we were seeing and taking seeds out of those gene banks because we still felt like there is something there, and either trying to preserve, there's like a handful of land races that are available that we've just been trying to kind of restabilize, or things that are, maybe commercially like Chongyang gochu, Oi gochu, things that actually are just more modern creations that have only existed in a hybrid context. We work to dehybridize those or make new crosses that kind of capture what Korean Americans now and Koreans are looking for in terms of flavor, texture, and sensation, and things like that. So for us, the big question is how we can provide these tools and resources as farmers. I could grow out something and through like plant breeding background, be able to isolate progeny lines and create these sibling clusters. But then, again, because of my sort of lack of understanding or depth of understanding about Korean food, we really need to reinvigorate those in more democratic processes, basically. So we're really concerned with how you create an on-ramp for anyone, regardless of your role in the food system, to really care deeply about this sort of right relationship we have with these crops. So you can see we grew out these land races from the USDA. This was the name of all of those varieties when we got them out of the gene bank. But when we looked into it, these are where they were from. Really significant places in Korea, where they were developed by, again, local farmers and peasants. And so we've tried to create on-ramps that are really engaging and involve community science, but in like the most delicious way possible. And so everything goes filtered through. Whatever we do in the field, we figure out a way to translate it and bring community in, again, to do these tastings. And I feel like the other thing that was important was not to arrive at a static conclusion. There's no definitive thing, but I think when you gather people together and it gets messy and you have people arguing about what a pepper is supposed to taste like, you're actually onto something. Because the more the water gets muddied, I think, especially for people living in different diasporas, the more it beckons us to think about like, well, what does culture mean to us? And can it be more something that we persist in constantly creating and iterating on, rather than something that we just think we're preserving. And I think the fact that so much of this has been dismantled outside of our control and really violated actually gives us this great in to just feel angry and then feel very determined to reclaim it. So this is just a little glimpse of some of the programs, and then Ursula Le Guin to close it out, because I can't think of better words to kind of encapsulate what we're trying to say.
Hi, hello. Sorry, I'm gonna use my phone like my work so I can't see. First of all, thank you so much to Ellie, GYOPO, Second Generation Seeds, and Non-Human Teachers for having us. So inspired by Kristen and Victor, who have so much intense knowledge about this. I think just to start, I was talking to Kristen yesterday, and we were sort of discussing how we are both kind of working on the same spectrum, but on opposite ends. She's working very much on the genetic level, and I feel like my work is sort of dealing with what happens on the human level, especially when these kind of adaptations happen over generations. So I'm really excited to sort of bring it from the genetic level and talk about how this actually affects Korean diaspora communities. So what we're gonna show is a very small 6-minute selection of what I hope is gonna be a 90-minute feature. I won't talk much because I'll just let the selection do the talking, but before anything, I really did wanna call out my team, who most of you know, like, documentary film is incredibly collaborative, and I'm sorry to embarrass you, Vanessa, but could you raise your hand real quick? This is Vanessa, she's our producer. She truly was my thought partner on every frame of everything, and it's been a marriage between us working on this project. We know each other very intensely now. And then also Alyssa, if you don't mind raising your hand real quick. So Alyssa is our story producer and worked on sound. And then Matthew, if you could raise your hand real quick. Where's Matthew? Matthew is our director of photography, and so you'll be seeing his beautiful work. But all of these people flew down to Oaxaca to film this with me. They will continue to work on this project, and I'll just let it go. So thank you for being here. So I talked to both Victor and Kristen yesterday, and we're trying to find some intersectionality in our work. And really, Kristen and I were sort of talking about, yes, this is an event about pepper, but to be honest, it's also not about pepper. It's about identity, it's about diaspora, and really we could have chosen any ingredient, but in particular, pepper is a really good example of showing the really complicated ways that identity moves through the world.
So I just wanted to start with a few questions. So I'll let you know. So this is the format. I'm going to ask 2 questions that for both of you can answer, and then I'm going to ask Victor a specific question, and then I'm going to ask Kristen a specific question. So I think one of the things that we were talking about between all of us was, so Victor, you mentioned in your book that sort of if you grew up in the Western world, Western European world, you sort of understood taste to be sour, sweet, bitter, and salty. So this is what we were taught. Umami sort of got added to the mix with Asian cultures. But chili and heat were really never considered definable and really became culturally a mark of the other. So it became sort of, if you associated with this particular sensation, you were kind of internalizing your otherness. So Victor, I wondered if you could sort of speak to that a little bit and how that became a tool of colonization.
Oh, do I use this one? Well, actually, I like that list you just gave me, but when I saw that, I said, oh, this is an opportunity. And I didn't, it took me a long time to get to the really nuts and bolts of how this was an opportunity. But I said, well, this system of taste, really 18th century way of defining taste and good food, is excluding us. I said, great, because that's also a way to turn the tables, to start, because one of the other things that I noticed was that the Europeans, either historically speaking, didn't give much importance to culinary art. They barely considered it. It doesn't really become a serious consideration till the later end of the 20th century. The French in the 18th and 19th century tried to do it, but they failed. They do a lot of interesting things, but they don't really figure out an aesthetic philosophy of the culinary experience. A lot of description. I was a journalist, and I read Ruth Reichel, and I read all the food writers, and I said, they're describing. They're all mimetic in the way they're looking at this. They said, there's no coherence for a philosophy. He said, that's an opportunity. But I didn't know, well, what do I do? How do I take off from there? So in an article I wrote for Gastronomica, the first thing I did was, well, what are my embodied experience of eating the food? And what poetics do I find in that? So that was the start. Then I began to, I did a whole series of steps. I'm going to skip quickly here. But one of the last ones was with Walter Mignolo, Argentine theorist, decolonial theorist, talks about the difference between aesthesis, sensory experience, and aesthetics, how we interpret that. And I said, oh, that's it. Start again. Erase the board. And then look at native or mestizo experiences of aesthetic experience and go through all the expressions. And one of the things here, there's a lot to draw from, but it's uncollated. Now, at the same time this is going on, I found out there's a fellow named Zhang in Singapore. He's a Chinese scholar doing the same thing. He said, we have to start. He said, there's an opportunity to have an eco-aesthetics of cuisine that breaks away completely from European thought. It doesn't rely on it. We don't need a chaperone, right? But the problem is going through the original primary sources and picking out what is relevant. Because for Chinese history, for example, you have an ancient history of talking about food and ecology and environment, but how do you organize it? So that's sort of what I was looking at. I didn't feel othered by that at all. I grew up in a family where we really enjoyed our food. There were farmers and ranchers, and that was one of the things I couldn't have written my book without that experience of people who were really very serious about what they were eating. My mother acquired incredible knowledge from Yucatecan cooks, from her own family, my father's family. So so that feeling, I know how other people could see it, but I never internalized that feeling. When kids came to my mother's house, they would love to, I was thinking in Hunger and Memory, Richard Rodriguez is covering the pots of his mother's Mexican cooking. And my family is completely the opposite. The kids are trying to get in so they can eat. For when my mom was running a party, for example, there could be she would do a whole table of appetizers, of all kinds of different Mexican appetizers, right? And the kids wanted to go in there, and they would just stand and look at her, and she would say, okay, here's your little garnacha, here's your little sope, and so then I said, okay, but the issue here was, decolonizing culinary aesthetics, but it took a long time. It started when I started Recipe of Memory. Don Davis was the editor. He said, "What's your next book?" And I said, "Oh, the aesthetics of Mexican cuisine." I didn't realize how unprepared I was. It took me like 20 years to even begin to like approach that. But then in 2012, 13, I was at Radcliffe at Harvard, and that was really the beginning of organizing that thought. So I'll stop there. So.
No, I mean, you actually are sort of touched on our next question, but I'm going to toss it to Kristen to sort of talk about if we're talking about the way that you're talking about how the pepper, who actually owns that pepper, who does it benefit? And can you sort of compare this to tools of colonization and how this kind of really gets represented in the pepper?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think kind of like your earlier question and some of what Victor said made me think too, like, well, there's also the way people opt into othering themselves. Like there's the uniqueness, and what I feel like hearing, especially when we bring stuff to Korean elders, was like, oh, I'm glad you're growing this because this is our variety. It's not like what you get at the store. Or even my daughter, I was picking gimmick for this event, and she was getting tired of being outside. She's like, are there only Korean people at this event? And I was like, no, it's going to be mixed. And she's like, well, you don't need to pick this much gimmick because only we like this. And I'm like, where did you hear this? Like, little ajima. But I was like, just for her to pick that up and that feeling. But I think too, like when we were speaking, you were like, dare we acknowledge?
That's my last question for you.
Oh, okay.
We'll save that one. Or we can go into it now.
No, yeah. I mean, I do think there's like an interesting thing and like those flavors and sensations. But with us, when we were doing a lot of tastings, we expected, like, we were like, we're going to serve you 100 tastings of pepper. Like, we don't expect anything that's going to be statistically compelling. But it was remarkable, actually, like, when just given the opportunity and giving people room to trust themselves and their experience, how consistent it actually was. And even anecdotally, what people described as like, well, how do you describe the flavor of pepper? Forget the Scoville scale, forget just talking about heat intensity, like, how do you talk about it? And that was so consistent. Oh, it's going to be on the back of the palate, and it comes in like this. Like, they made like a whole different like bell chart about how Korean pepper is experienced. And they actually narrowed it down from 100 varieties to like 4 siblings that they were like, this is like this. And like other ones were distinctly like, no, this is a Korean pepper. So I do think it's interesting too, just the ways you opt into like, and the ways you can find empowerment of just being like, well, no, yeah, you can other me, but this is what makes us us, actually.
I mean, too, a little bit to your point, I mean, I was just thinking about this as you were speaking when you were giving your presentation, but how genetic biodiversity is a way, it really mirrors kind of what I've been working on in terms of talking about how different kinds of Korean people, for all the different shapes and ways that we can hybridize and be types of Koreans, those are all legitimate. Like, biodiversity and human diversity are really mirroring each other, and that having this percentage of Koreanness doesn't make you any less Korean or more Korean, but I was making those sort of relationships as well.
Yeah, and I mean, in your film, when you were talking about it doesn't dilute, like removal from an ancestral land doesn't dilute, like your claim to that, like, I think there is something so beautiful in that, just because also these seeds, like, they're not native to these lands, where I'm not native to these lands, like, what does that mean? And by necessity, like, those crops really have to adapt. Like, I can't pour water on to mimic a monsoon summer, right? Like, so when you think about not just like squaring up your relationship with these crops and these foods, but really like sitting in some sort of right relationship with like the complexities of being part of a diaspora, it's like our imperative was first, like, these crops have to adapt and they have to change. So how can we maintain some sense of cultural legibility, but allow these crops to actually be good actors in these ecosystems? How do we breed for heat and drought tolerance? And how do we incorporate and embed them in these ecosystems where, yeah, they're nourishing all the other life that is like present in this land?
I mean, I think it's really interesting talking about preservation, domestication, this idea that, and when I'm trying to tie this to the diasporic experience, I think you and I have talked, or I talked to Vanessa about this, but thinking about sort of this immigrant impulse once you move to another country to preserve, to arrest your culture from wherever you left it from that point. So that's the way that you hold on to it because that's what you remember. And so I think often as children of diaspora, we forget that these things should move. that these things should be fluid, that they aren't, it isn't natural for them to be static, and it's also true of plant life.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to...
Can I just add
Of course.
something? My experience, my immigration for my family takes place in a different kind of context. So for us, it is, we knew we belonged secretly, but we were told we didn't. See, and that's the connection to that's why there's more in that slide, our deep and complex and paradoxical relationship to the Western Hemisphere.
What gave you the confidence to know that you belonged one the
Because
exterior?
I had a family that was very strong. They had gone through many different trials. My father was, he was deported. He illegally lost his residency during 1931, during the forced expulsion of Mexicans. So, and the other thing too was that they were very Mexican nationalists. Both, it has a good qualities and it has some bad qualities, but the good one was that they had a sense of the history of the hemisphere. They said nothing is entirely foreign to us, right? I said, some of your ancestors, I found out that some of my ancestors were here in the 17th century on my grandfather's side, right? So and then there are people who just came over yesterday. So that's a whole nother way of talking about place. But what's important here, I think, is if you're sort of making a fetish of identity, you're going to be in a house of mirrors forever. And so the thing that I was interested in is, well, I had this feeling of connection to place. How do I verbalize that? How do I expand that? How do I offer that to more people so we all own that? We all, and so that we be connected. Because if we're more connected to the place, then we can do more. We can fight better. We can stand up for ourselves better. And the more we are shown not connected to the place, and I don't care who you are, then you say, oh, you don't count. No, and that's the thing. And right now, by the way, in this political season, that whole, the whole Mexican immigrant, and by the way, there's very few Mexican immigrants coming over right now, but it doesn't matter. They want that trope, and they're going to repeat it and repeat it. And we have to be, as Mexicans, we have to be very stubborn and say, fuck you. It's like, you aren't going to do that to us. We're going to fight the way and we have to get that courage to say no. So I was raised in a family where that was the attitude, right? So.
I think I'm going to move on to the individual questions because both of you sort of answered the next question through our talk. So, Kristen, I'm just going to move to what we were talking about before, what we kind of teased. But so you mentioned it in your presentation, sort of the recent, how the pepper is actually fairly recent in Asia and was actually brought through from the Portuguese and the Spanish. And I think there's a lot of theories which you can speak to about how this happened, but one of them is that it came through Japan. And we sort of worry that this would be a really problematic thing to bring up because obviously pepper, kimchi is so iconic to Korean identity, and then to have it pass through colonization and then through our ultimate colonizer and then to us, like why do we not talk about this? How did it get associated so strongly with Korean culture? We also talked about how beautiful it was that it moved in this way that it sort of manifested its home. Like it passed through Japan, and certainly Japanese people used the pepper in different preparations, but Koreans were like, this is our ingredient. And
for us.
Yeah. So maybe Kristen, could you speak to that history a little bit and how problematic that is?
Sure. I mean, when you brought it up, it was like kind of hush, like the register of your voice changed. You're like, dare we loop this into the program, which is understandable because, yeah, it is obviously a sore spot to credit or be perceived as crediting Japan with something that like is so emblematic of Korean culture. And I was sharing too, like even though it's kind of like the agreed upon consensus is yes, like Imjin War, that's when Japan kind of introduced it via Portugal. That I had found like a research article that was like very shady, but like someone went through a lot of effort to like reference pepper genomics and things to basically say that they concluded that there's no way Japan introduced chili pepper, and it is entirely due to a wild bird depositing a pepper on a mountaintop And that pepper just evolved outside of any other non-Korean influence. It was just between the bird and the pepper and the mountains of Korea. And I was like, yes, it's so Korean. And I like read this and I was like, this is amazing. This is like, you know, like a 30-page thing. It's really like dot, dot, dot. So we say, this bird happened. And now it's native to us. But I think there's something to be said about just, I mean, I think there's like the Alice Walker quote circulating now, like, what's mine will find me. And I think that not to erase like just the terrors and trauma of colonization, but just to say like, there's something beautiful about finding something within that becomes like, you weaponize that and it becomes empowering. Like that became your sustenance, that became embedded in your national identity. And it became a way to persevere. Like it persevered against cultural erasure. So it's like your colonizers just gave you the tool to resist them. And I think that that's also like the beauty of plants, of just being like, you actually can't subject them to that in perpetuity. Like plants are just way smarter. They're better company, they're way smarter than our species. They've got more gigabase pairs, right? Like we all know this. So I think that there's just something very liberatory about saying like, oh, this partnership actually of the beautiful acts of defiance and sustenance, and something can come to you in like the worst, one of the depths of your history, and you found a way to transform it. Like, and I think that that's something to be proud of, actually.
No, I think you put that so beautifully, thinking about it as really like that act, instead of being scared to talk about this, to think of it as an empowering way of like trusting the ingredient, knowing that the right people in the right hands will love it and do with. And it's just pepper is a great symbol for Korean tenacity, adaptability through colonization, the perseverance despite going through so many difficult adaptations and traveling so far.
Once you explain that, I find a parallel because this is the part that Mexicans are uncomfortable talking about. And that is that the people who bring chili cultivation are the Tlaxcalans, the people who were the enemies of the Aztecs. And because the Spanish were failing so miserably in expanding their gold mining operations, they were basically in a 90-year war with the people of what is now Durango and Jalisco. They could not get beyond that point. They said they went back to the Tlaxcalans, who had been their allies. They would not have defeated the Aztecs without them. The Tlaxcalans strike a bargain. They say, well, we want the rights to establish our own cities. Meanwhile, remember, people are dying of diseases they don't know why. They want to get out of central Mexico. So they go. So here, what is a paradox is that they are agents of empire because they end up establishing many cities, and they are also of their own sovereignty. The church is angry with them, and the gentry is angry with them because they have rights of hidalgos, of free minor nobility, and they can't boss them around. So here you have native people being the agents of imperial expansion and are crucial. And in fact, the Mexican food, a lot of the Mexican food we eat now is the result of that adaptation. The Tlaxcalans, the Purepecha, other people of central Mexico, they have to invent a new cuisine that can survive through the desert. Because a lot of the 60 standard cultivars of central Mexico, only a handful survive in the desert. You have to go through the Chihuahuan and the Sonoran Desert, and you have to reinvent an agriculture and invent a cuisine. And so that's the tenacity you're talking about. How do they create? Because one of the things that once their villages become established, slaves want to escape to these Tlaxcalan towns because the Tlaxcalans can say, we will recognize you as a free subject. You don't need the landlord or the church to recognize you. We will do it. So within that colonial experience, they are carving out their own freedom. So it's like, but they're actively displacing other native people in the desert Southwest. We have to say that too. So for Chicanos, that's like we wanted so easily to own that indigenous past, but wait a minute, it's complex. It's very messy, extremely messy,
I mean, I think messy is sort of the theme. It sounds like, really, I think what you're pointing out is that this story of tenacity of plant biodiversity is not unique to Koreans. It is a global map of how economic powers work, how colonization works, how generally the power moves through the world, and really it's a mapping of history. And it certainly isn't unique to any particular group. Victor, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Okay.
So as a
You
writer,
can give it to her. I've talked enough.
it's very specific to you. So when we were talking yesterday, you said this elegant phrase that really just stopped me. You were talking about how often in science we find that the origin of a species correlates with where you can find most of its biodiversity, where it is the most diverse.
Bobby Love Center, yeah.
And it's how this also mirrors the diversity of language. And I really would like for you to sort of unpack that for us a little bit.
Well, those two things came together when they were finding. They found that the northeastern mountains of Oaxaca is a place with the greatest genetic diversity of capsicums, animals, right? Okay, so they established that. At the same time, they said, well, what are the oldest words for that? And the oldest words for the plant, for the chili, are coming from a handful of languages. The people who are now called Zapotec or Dixtaza, which is the way they call themselves, or Mixtec. And so you're in an area of incredible indigenous diversity, because I mean, in Oaxaca they have seven communities, distinct communities, not counting dialects and so forth. So you're right in that center of that human diversity and biodiversity, and that's what's sort of interesting, because before people thought, well, since corn was domesticated in the Tehuacan Valley, close by there, by the way, not far away, they said, well, this has to be where everything started. People are changing that. They say, give some Oaxaca some credit. And it's interesting that you're in Oaxaca. Now, I want to say one more thing, however. The Mesoamerican approach to Chile is a little different. For them, if you go back to the Florentine Codex, which is this series of deep interviews the Dominican friars had with the surviving scribes, because many of the scribes were killed, okay? But the ones who survived begin this whole 17-volume history of their world, right? And in that, they give records of the marketplace and descriptions of what is good chili and what is bad chili. In their descriptions of chilies, they're taught 12 varieties. So in other words, these are standards. So if you're cooking in their world, you need 12 chilies. Think about that. This is not industrial production, okay? It's the complete opposite. What's interesting, what you were saying about chili being this, chili is, by its very nature, wants to be diverse. And it's the opposite of an industrial cultivar. And it's a species that holds so much of its wild DNA that it's perfect for adapting to new places. So this is I found that extremely interesting and important. And but what's interesting, aesthetically speaking, then, what's also happening in Mesoamerica is that you don't have this perfect potato, or there's not this essential pure entity of an experience. They said no, you're going to have your culinary experience if you have this whole palette. It's based on excellence and diversity, and that's aesthetically speaking. Ooh, that's very cool. It's okay because that's their system, and they were saying the bad chili is like this, the good chili is like. They're telling you specifically what is good, what is bad, and in the marketplace, it's also telling you how to shop.
No, and I think that correlation really says a lot. Where there's more biodiversity, you need more language to describe that biodiversity. You just need more language if there's more variety. And I loved that very kind of sensical, logical way that language and plant life develop. With that, I know that we're all really hot, so we're gonna end the moderated portion, but we would like to throw out maybe 2 to 3 questions if anybody has some. And then if you want to stand up in your seat and say the question, and then I'll repeat it on the mic. Or we don't have to have questions. Yes?
I can do it from here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for such illuminating presentations. Victor, I'm wondering about the idea of mestizaje and how you are thinking through mestizaje through, connecting to notions of indigeneity, and I'm saying this because, for instance, in Guatemala, you have the so-called cocina criolla, no?
Mm-hmm.
So all of the food that we know, that we think that relates to indigenous cultures, like mostly Mayan, are kaki, jocom, etc., are actually just colonial cuisine, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think of indigenous food or cuisine, it's just barely you know, it has been completely ostracized
Mhm.
from just like people's culture of like what we think as indigenous food. And that's one of the reasons on why I feel that the idea of identity is insufficient to think
Really?
about food and our relationship to it. And you know, like mestizaje in the US is pretty different than Mexico and Guatemala. So I'm thinking, how is that you connect the idea of food and kind of like indigenizing our own connection to land in order
Oh.
to relate? So it's kind of
It's a big question.
because it feels like a very a strong, like a powerful metaphor, right? Like
It is, yes. I agree with that. That's what the whole book is about. But I would say, well, I'm gonna just go over some areas. One of the things is that you have, comida criolla is very important, historically speaking, when you want to understand South American and Mexican cuisine. What we think is so different actually is an overlay of colonialism, right? And so when you go to Yucatan, you're going to see a version of this sort of mixture 101. And in that first mixture, the Spanish were limiting, they didn't, this is the paradox. The people who end up spreading chili to the borderlands didn't really like chili, didn't want it. It was just too hot. It was, they had an ideal diet in mind, and their ideal diet was a Spanish diet, but that diet could only be reproduced in the highlands. See, so there's mixture occurring, but it's reluctant and limited. And then in Mexico, meanwhile, indigenous communities, they're going full steam ahead. They're the ones who survive. They're perpetuating their cuisine. So one of the things that happens is by the 19th century, when we're talking about Mexican cookbooks is a good example of that. When you get to the 19th century, you have the city recipes, which are very European, but in the homes, in the provincia, you're getting another period of mixtures occurring, where it's local, it's still European leaning, but taking more ingredients. And then the Mexican Revolution comes, and another period of rupture and mixture occurs. But what's interesting is a lot of what is marketed as authentic Mexican food in the tourist industry is rather recent. It's like 1960s. It's where they sort of say, oh, we still have our provincial cooking and our indigenous cooking. Let's sell it. But that wasn't the first thought. And one of the things to talk about that's a complex issue is the Spanish developed these terms called comida de indios y comida de cristianos. Right? So from the very beginning, we have this way of building white supremacy. It's what we're talking about, the Spanish version of it. And food is a powerful metaphor of what is in, what is out. Now, so what is mestizo, what you're talking about, is actually recent. But it's been a process, iteration. And then the other thing then is, in each community, wherever you go, Mexico doesn't have one cuisine. It has dozens of cuisines. We have areas who have a very criollo cuisine, right? And then other areas where they're completely indigenous. It is not this uniform thing. So now what's interesting is that you're going to Oaxaca, right? So it's like, okay, now this other world gets to speak. So we're at the beginning of a process. I don't see it. We're just starting. Now, what happens then, this is why I began to think about identity differently. If you're looking for this pure original starting position, it doesn't exist. For native communities who are coming from Oaxaca, for them they can claim that. That's completely legitimate. But for a lot of us, like my family, our relationships to that are very complex, and some are close, some are far. There is no one place we can all say we're going to start from here. So instead of trying to do that, which I don't think is possible, I say let's adapt to where we are. Let's indigenize our relationship to place. Everybody can do that. And recognize our debt to our indigenous ancestors, the ones who gave us these tremendous plants. Because instead of trying to sort that identity issue out in that way, I think will be never ending and leads to a lot of self-indulgence, I think, eventually. So, sorry to hope.
Alyssa, do you have a question?
crisis. And I just want to hear both your thoughts because you're talking about like, I mean, our foodway system can be it's extremely vulnerable right now with monoculture crops and things like that. Like, what do you think? I guess because I also studied, we're doing a story about Oaxaca too, and like, you're saying it's full of biodiversity and you're talking about indigenous things, but then it's all wiped out basically. Like, there's not, like, the native pollinators aren't coming. And so, like, how do you keep this food system going and how do you stay within your culture if, like, literally our system's collapsing because colonization and farming? Things like that. It's a big question, but I've been working on it for a year, so it's like all I think about.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But someone has to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite bleak, and I think speaking to you earlier, it is like there is a point of no return that we seemingly have passed in terms of just how bottlenecked things have gotten, and we really can't go back to, or we can't recover those losses. But I do think that there's still like a lot of inspiring possibilities there. Like, I'm blanking on the book name because I'm just nervous having everyone stare at me, but there's a researcher named Ide who looked in the Central Valley and looked at mostly Hmong and Mien farmers. And it's like you think about their farms and the size of land that they're cultivating, which is like anywhere between like a quarter acre and maybe 2 acres. And you see that in a sea of monoculture, of nuts, you know, like a revolving door of what's making money. And you think like, well, that's great, like, but what good is it? It feels like futile. And as a small farmer, you really feel that way. But Ide's research really showed like this multiplier effect of just like how substantial that actually is to have like these little oases, even when it feels like, you know, you're driving up the 5, you know, for me going back home and you just see monoculture after monoculture. But actually just like Victor was saying, like things are iterating in that direction. Like life wants to really thrive and be really life affirming. And so I do think that as much as we can maintain and keep ensuring that communities have access to land, that intelligence is really persevering, like agroecological systems, like, and the impact of those actually like doesn't scale in a really linear way. Like, and so you may think, oh, what good could this do? But actually, Ide is inspiring because she is showing statistically it is very impactful, like whatever it is, a quarter acre in terms of just like mycorrhizal fungi and like restoring soils, what that does for our water table. All of these things actually like exceed the sum of their parts. So I do think that like as a farmer, like the answer to me will always be like, oh, just making sure that, you know, indigenous communities have access to these lands. That's like the people that know the medicine that's needed to heal these landscapes. And that, yeah, like a lot of farmers just need more opportunities to take care of that land.
In Santa Maria, where I live, you go to the swap meets, and they have the one at I guess it's the fairgrounds. And you will see a Vavilov Center of Biodiversity. I had the slides to show you all the different kind of plants people are growing. And a lot of these, you know, an incredible variety of plants, and plants that are semi-wild, that are actually good for the time that we're in, which are normally considered wild plants, but if you treat them differently, for example, the chenopods, what do they call that?
Like goosefoot,
yeah,
spinach.
Yeah, all those. The wild chenopods have the highest protein content of a green. Now, so these people are here and they're like giving us answers, just going to, and to buy their food is important, but also the question of access to land. And that's the question, there's a deeply political question that we can't avoid. You know, this question of the enclosure, new ways of turning what was public, private. We have to fight it. I mean, we have to find ways to do that, because then without any access to land, you don't have a way to do all this experimentation.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, let's be very clear about that. So one of the things that's interesting, a colleague of mine, I forget the name of the book, it was South Central Dreams, I think, where the two scholars looked at what happened, you know, remember, I don't know if you guys remember the South Central farm, and they kicked everybody out, and it was, you know, it was a big catastrophe. Well, the post period of that was that I think there are 16 now public gardens in what is called South Central LA. And the people who are using them are primarily indigenous people. And they're not only growing indigenous crops, they're using indigenous methods, methods that I only saw described in books of anthropology. People were like, especially techniques for growing chenopods. You know, the purple one, the gray one, there's all these different ones. And I go, it's called huertos or humid gardens. Or basically it's a trench where you're using, you know, it's like reverse, the opposite of a furrow. It's a bed, right? And people were, and I went and bought the quelites, you know, incredibly delicious if you know how to grow them, if you pick them at the right time. If you don't, they're indigestible, right? So that knowledge of how to do that with a wild plant, that's the people we have to be talking to, because, you know, surviving climate change, we're going to have to rely on these semi-wild plants and make them taste good. That's the other thing too. Not just make ourselves suffer, right?
Well, I think too, like even within that, there's so much diversity, like for all those quinopods, like in place, and going back to what you said about language. And I think that there's also a tendency when we talk about biodiversity, like we collapse it into monoliths the same way we do human communities. And so we just think like, oh, like Perillo is, to me, is a prime example, right? And just the danger of how language and erasure kind of works, because in all the seed catalogs, when I was looking through them, it's all just called shiso. And people just say, oh, well, botanically it's shiso. And I think we would get so much pushback, and people would be like, oh, you're just being so Korean right now, just being like, don't call it the Japanese name. But I was like, yes, but also it is botanically really different. Like it's identifiable. Like if you looked at the genes, you could distinguish where they come from. And then we were looking, and we have samples for everyone to try, like through the Korean gene bank, they had preserved like over 300 accessions of Perilla that felt distinct to the Korean peninsula evolving there. And so then you think like, oh, you even think like, oh, well, there's a Korean cultivar, but it's not one thing. And so I think collapsing even just like and simplifying and checking it off the box, like, okay, well, we've got like the Korean version, we've got the Japanese version, but within all of that, there's still so much richness where it is like they're all just really different. But I think that's part of the thing with just understanding, again, like if we have this curation happening and it's from a really culturally homogenous point of view, then yeah, that's also part of the work, like of doing the work of like imperialism, of just being like, okay, well, we're satiated. We have our one little flag in this variety, and not acknowledging that for any crop you really love, there's probably like 100 times that variety that like all represent different characteristics that are really maybe not the most delicious. Like a lot of the Perilla we preserved, we tried to bring to people, and they're like, yikes, even for us, no, you know, but it's still like there's something
You gotta
there.
find out.
Yeah, and it's like, well, we're not gonna like maybe sell all of this, or people don't want to eat it, but there's still something there that seems worth preserving, because otherwise it won't be, you know, like, and I think that's what's kind of scary.
Do we have time for one more? No more? Okay, so we're done with the questions. So I'm going to invite everyone to join us outside, because Kristen brought her beautiful perilla. And then I also made a few special sauces for you to try it with. So there's one, all of them have the GYOPO gochu from second generation seeds, and were grown at Goody Farms. And then there's one aioli that has chicatanas, which are ants from Oaxaca, and so they've been ground up in there. They're very good, don't be scared. And then the other one is, it's a samjang using the same GYOPO gochu, but it has all local ingredients from our local farmers. And yeah, so feel free to try some and try the pepper. Thank you.